The courthouse steps were cold beneath my knees as I collapsed there, clutching the manila envelope that held everything. Every lie, every forged signature, every stolen dollar. My own son's signature on documents I'd never seen. My daughter's name on bank accounts that drained my life savings while I slept. 63 years of building a life and they'd been tearing it down from the inside. The security guard who'd escorted me out kept glancing back, probably wondering if the crazy old lady was going to cause another scene. That's what they'd called me for months. Crazy. Delusional. Paranoid. When I told them someone was stealing from me, they'd exchanged those looks. The ones children give each other when mom starts forgetting things. When I'd insisted my bank statements were wrong, they gently suggested maybe it was time to let someone else handle the finances. When I'd accused them of lying, they'd made appointments with doctors. But I wasn't crazy. The envelope crinkled as my hands shook. Inside were copies of everything the private investigator had found. Bank records showing systematic withdrawals. Property deeds transferred without my knowledge. Insurance policies with beneficiaries I'd never approved. A paper trail that led directly to the people I'd loved most in this world. The people who'd been slowly, methodically destroying me while telling everyone I was losing my mind. If this story is already stirring something in your heart, I'd love to know, what time is it where you are right now and which city or state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Let's see how far this story is reaching. Before everything unraveled, I thought I knew what love looked like. It looked like Sunday dinners around my grandmother's oak table, the one I'd inherited and polished religiously for 40 years. It smelled like pot roast and fresh bread, sounded like my children's laughter echoing through rooms where I'd raised them alone after their father died. It felt like arms around my shoulders when David graduated medical school, like tears of joy when Sarah's first baby took his first breath in my arms. I was Margaret Eleanor Hartwell, 72 years old, and I believed in the simple truth that family meant everything. My house on Maple Street had been home for 4 decades. White clapboard siding with blue shutters, I repainted myself every few years. A garden where I grew tomatoes and roses with equal devotion. The mortgage had been paid off for 15 years. The nest egg Robert left me had grown carefully, conservatively, into something that would ensure I never became a burden to anyone. I was so proud of that. So determined to take care of myself. The neighbors still waved when I walked to the mailbox each morning at exactly 8:15. Mrs. Chin next door brought me soup when I had the flu last winter. The mailman Tommy always asked about my grandchildren and remembered their names. I wasn't isolated. I wasn't confused. I drove myself to the grocery store, balanced my own checkbook, managed my own medications, read 3 books a week from the library. But somewhere in the space between what I thought I knew and what was actually happening, my world had become a carefully constructed lie. And the people I trusted most were the architects. The morning everything started to crack open, I was doing what I'd done every Tuesday for 20 years. Reviewing my bank statements at the kitchen table with my coffee and reading glasses. The numbers didn't make sense. A withdrawal for $8,000 that I didn't remember making. When I called the bank, they assured me the transaction was legitimate. Made by my authorized agent. But I'd never authorized anyone. David was my firstborn, the one who'd held my hand through the hardest years after Robert died. Born serious, born responsible, he'd been my rock when cancer took his father and left me with 2 teenagers and a mountain of medical bills. Even as a child, David had worried about money. He'd count his allowance, save birthday dollars in mason jars, ask careful questions about whether we had enough. When I'd tuck him in at night, he'd whisper, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" "We're going to be more than okay," I'd promise. "We're going to build something beautiful." Sarah came 2 years later, all sunshine and spontaneity where David was storm clouds and planning. She painted her bedroom walls in colors that made me dizzy, purple and orange and silver, and she changed her mind about everything twice a week. Career plans, boyfriends, dreams for the future. But she had Robert's laugh, the kind that made everyone around her smile involuntarily. She'd call me at random hours just to tell me about a song she'd heard or a sunset that reminded her of the ones we used to watch from the back porch. After Robert died, they'd wrapped around me like a protective shell. David, 16 and suddenly trying to be the man of the house. Sarah, 14 and fiercely defensive of anyone who dared to pity us. "We don't need anybody else," Sarah had declared one night when a well-meaning neighbor suggested I might want to start dating again. "We're perfect just the way we are." We were perfect. Or so I believed. David went to medical school on scholarships and student loans, but I helped where I could. When he needed money for board exams, I was there. When his residency salary couldn't cover both rent and groceries, I made sure he ate. When he got married to Jennifer, a lovely girl from a family with money, I paid for half the wedding because that's what mothers do. Sarah took a different path. Art school, then a series of jobs that never quite paid enough. Retail, waitressing, teaching yoga to wealthy women who could afford to pay her what art lessons never would. She moved back home 3 times, always between apartments, always, just until I get back on my feet. I never minded. The house felt too empty without their voices. When the grandchildren came, David's 2 boys, Sarah's little girl, my world became complete again. Sleepovers where we'd build blanket forts and eat ice cream for breakfast. Teaching them to plant seeds in my garden. Watching their faces when the first green shoots appeared. I lived for those moments. I saved for those moments. David's practice flourished. Orthopedic surgery, the kind of medicine that pays well and commands respect. He bought a house in the best part of town, sent his boys to private school, took family vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines. But he still worried about money. Still asked careful questions about my situation. "Mom, you should really let me help you with your finances," he'd say during our monthly dinners. "Investment strategies have changed. You could be doing so much better." Sarah worried differently. She worried about my loneliness, my independence, my safety in that big old house, all by myself. "You don't need all that space," she'd say, usually when she was between jobs again. "You could sell and move somewhere smaller. Easier to maintain." And I was thinking maybe I could move back home for a while. Just until I figure things out. Their concern felt like love. It was so easy to mistake control for caring. The first time David suggested I add him to my bank accounts, I laughed. "Honey, I've been managing money since before you were born. I think I can handle a checking account." But he was persistent. Gentle but persistent. "It's not about your ability, Mom. It's about efficiency. Emergency access. What if something happens to you? How would we pay your bills? Handle your affairs? What if something happens to you?" Those words planted themselves in my mind like seeds in dark soil. What if something did happen? What if I had a stroke, a heart attack, an accident? Who would take care of things then? The fear of becoming a burden had haunted me since Robert's death. I'd watched my own mother struggle in her final years, seen how her dependence had strained everyone around her. I wouldn't do that to my children. I'd be prepared. So I added David's name to my primary checking account. For emergencies, I'd specified. Only for emergencies. The first withdrawal I didn't recognize came 3 months later. The bank teller had that practice smile that said she'd explain this 1,000 times to confused elderly customers. "Mrs. Hartwell, the withdrawal was made by your authorized user, Dr. David Hartwell. He has full access to this account, per your signed authorization." I stared at the statement. $8,000. Gone on a Tuesday morning while I'd been at my book club discussing The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. There must be some mistake. David wouldn't take money without asking me. But even as I said it, doubt crept in like cold air under a door. Her smile tightened with subtle impatience. "Perhaps you should speak with your son directly, Mrs. Hartwell. I'm sure there's a simple explanation." Simple explanation. The phrase echoed in my head during the drive home. David always had simple explanations. For why he was too busy to call. For why family dinners had to be rescheduled. For why he thought I should consider hiring someone to help with housework, yard work, paperwork. I called him from my kitchen phone, the same yellow rotary phone I'd had for 30 years. Some things didn't need to be updated. "Mom, hi. I was just thinking about you. David, I need to ask you something. There's a withdrawal from my account." "Oh, that." His voice carried relief, like he'd been expecting a different kind of call. "Sorry, I should have mentioned it. Jennifer's sister is going through that messy divorce, and she needed a short-term loan. I knew you'd want to help family. Jennifer's sister, whom I'd met exactly twice. But $8,000, David. That's... I'll pay it back myself if she can't. You know I'm good for it. Actually, this probably works out well for you tax-wise. I'll have my accountant run the numbers. Tax-wise. As if I hadn't been filing my own taxes for 50 years. I wish you'd asked first." Silence stretched between us. When he finally spoke, his voice had shifted to the tone he probably used with difficult patience. Mom, we agreed this account was for managing your affairs. Jennifer's sister is practically family and time was a factor. But if this is going to be a problem, maybe we need to discuss a more comprehensive approach to your finances. Comprehensive approach. The words felt like a diagnosis I didn't want to receive. What do you mean? We'll talk about it at dinner Sunday. Don't worry about this, okay? Everything's handled. But I did worry. All week I worried. Because comprehensive approaches to my finances sounded like someone else making decisions about my life. And because $8,000 wasn't coming back. Jennifer's sister's divorce settled 6 months later. The money was never repaid. When I asked about it, David seemed genuinely surprised that I'd even remembered. Mom, that was months ago. She's family. We don't keep scorecards with family. But it was my scorecard. My money. My choice to make. That's when I started paying closer attention to my statements. Really looking at the numbers instead of just filing them away. $3,000 to Hartwell Medical Consulting. A company I'd never heard of but apparently owned half of, according to paperwork I didn't remember signing. $5,000 for home maintenance expenses, on a house that hadn't seen a contractor in 2 years. $1,200 for medical consultation fees from doctors I'd never visited. Each withdrawal had my authorized signature. Or someone's very good imitation of it. Sarah started visiting more often around the same time. Sweet, spontaneous visits that always seemed to happen when I was going through bills or talking to banks. Mom, you look stressed. Are you having trouble with something? She'd perch on the arm of my reading chair like she had as a child, all concern and affection. But her eyes would drift to whatever papers I'd been sorting. Just the usual bills, sweetheart. You know, I've been thinking. You shouldn't have to deal with all this paperwork. It's so overwhelming these days. All those forms and statements and, is this about your investments? Because I read this article about seniors getting confused by financial documents. Seniors getting confused. I'm not confused, Sarah. Of course not. That's not what I meant at all. I just meant, wouldn't it be nice if someone else handled the boring stuff? So you could focus on the things you actually enjoy. The things I actually enjoy. As if managing my own life wasn't one of them. But the seed was planted. Their concern felt real and their love was real even if their methods were questionable. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe I was making things harder than they needed to be. Maybe the problem was me. The second major incident happened on a Thursday morning in October. I'd gone to my lawyer's office to update my will. Nothing dramatic, just some small changes to charitable donations. When Robert Hendricks, who'd been my attorney for 20 years, pulled out my file, his expression changed. Margaret, I have to ask. Did you recently execute a new will with another attorney? No. Why would you ask that? He turned his computer screen toward me. Because according to the county records, a new will was filed 3 weeks ago. It supersedes everything we have on file. A will I'd never written. Decisions I'd never made. The blood drained from my face as he read the highlights. My house left to David. My investments divided between David and Sarah. Small token amounts to the grandchildren. And my explicit wish that any claims of mental incompetency should result in David assuming full power of attorney. I never wrote this, I whispered. Robert Hendricks had known me for 2 decades. He'd guided me through Robert's death, helped me navigate single motherhood, celebrated when the kids graduated. The look in his eyes said he believed me. But it also said that legally it might not matter. Margaret, I need to ask some difficult questions. Have you been experiencing any memory issues? Confusion? Has anyone suggested you might be losing my mind? The phrase hung between us like a landmine. I'm going to suggest something and I want you to listen carefully. Don't tell anyone about this conversation. Don't mention the will. Come back tomorrow and bring any documentation you have about your finances. All of it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with every bank statement, every investment report, every piece of paperwork I could find. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in slow motion. I was being systematically robbed. And the thieves had convinced everyone, maybe even themselves, that they were taking care of me. The phone rang at 10:30. Sarah's voice, bright and cheerful. Hi, Mom. I was just calling to say goodnight. You sound tired. Everything okay? Had she always called to check on me? Or had these wellness calls started around the same time money started disappearing? I'm fine, sweetheart. Good. Sweet dreams. When Mom? David mentioned you've been asking a lot of questions about your accounts lately. You know we're just looking out for you, right? We love you so much. Love. The word that had always meant safety now felt like a leash. The third incident was the one that broke something fundamental inside me. It happened 3 weeks later on a Tuesday that started like any other. I'd driven to the bank to make a deposit, my monthly Social Security check, plus a small dividend check from one of Robert's old investments. Nothing unusual. Nothing complicated. The teller, a young man I'd never seen before, looked at my ID, then at his computer screen, then at me with a mixture of confusion and pity. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to get my supervisor." Ma'am. Not Mrs. Hartwell like the other tellers who'd known me for years. The supervisor appeared, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm afraid there's been a flag placed on your account. I can't process any transactions without authorization from your power of attorney." What? She consulted her screen again. "Dr. David Hartwell. It says here that due to concerns about cognitive impairment, all transactions require his approval." Cognitive impairment. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the counter to keep from swaying. "There's been a mistake. I never gave anyone power of attorney." Her expression softened with professional sympathy. "Ma'am, sometimes these things are hard to remember. Perhaps you should call your son? I'm sure he can clear this up. Sometimes these things are hard to remember." I was 72 years old, sharp as I'd ever been, capable of managing my own affairs. But sitting in that bank, seeing the way she looked at me, like I was fragile, confused, unreliable, I felt myself becoming the person they'd decided I was. The crazy old lady who couldn't remember what she'd signed. I drove home in a daze, my deposit still unprocessed, my independence apparently revoked. The house on Maple Street that had been my sanctuary for 40 years suddenly felt like a trap. Because if they could take my money without my knowledge, if they could file legal documents in my name, if they could convince banks I was incompetent, what else could they do? That night I called Robert Hendricks at home. "I need to hire a private investigator," I said without preamble. "Margaret." "Robert, I need to know what they've done. All of it. Because I have a feeling I've only seen the beginning. The beginning of losing everything. The beginning of becoming invisible in my own life. The beginning of fighting for my right to exist." The private investigator's name was Janet Morrison, and she had the kind of weathered face that suggested she'd seen every variety of human cruelty without losing her capacity for surprise. We met in a coffee shop 30 miles from my house, neutral territory she'd called it. Away from eyes that might be watching. Away from my children. The file she placed between us was thin but devastating. 3 weeks of careful investigation condensed into 47 pages that dismantled my life with forensic precision. "Mrs. Hartwell, I want you to prepare yourself for what you're about to see." But nothing could have prepared me. The first document was a medical evaluation I'd never undergone, signed by a doctor I'd never met, diagnosing me with progressive cognitive decline and recommending immediate supervised care. The second was a petition for guardianship, filed by David, supported by Sarah's sworn statement that I'd become increasingly paranoid and financially irresponsible. Paranoid. The words stared back at me from official legal documents. "Your daughter's affidavit details several incidents," Janet said gently. "Claims that you've accused family members of stealing, that you've made irrational financial decisions, that you've expressed confusion about basic daily tasks." Irrational financial decisions. Like objecting to $8,000 disappearing from my account. "It's all lies," I whispered. "I know. But they're convincing lies, documented by people with credentials and standing in the community." The third document made my hands shake so violently I could barely hold it. A purchase agreement for my house on Maple Street, listing David as the seller, with my signature notarized on a date when I'd been in the hospital with pneumonia. They'd sold my house while I was fighting for my life. "The sale went through last week," Janet continued. "The new owners take possession in 60 days. Your son has already placed a deposit on a suitable care facility for your transition." Suitable care facility. Where they could visit twice a week and tell everyone how hard they'd tried to keep me at home until it became impossible. There's more. Of course there was more. Bank records showing systematic withdrawals totaling over $300,000. Investment accounts liquidated and transferred to trusts managed by David's law firm. Insurance policies cashed out with beneficiaries changed to bypass me entirely. $300,000. 60 years of careful saving, reduced to numbers on paper I'd never seen. The pattern suggests this has been planned for at least 2 years, Janet said. The paperwork is sophisticated. Professional. This isn't opportunistic theft. It's a comprehensive strategy designed to transfer your assets while establishing a legal justification for doing so. 2 years. While I'd been making Sunday dinners and babysitting grandchildren and believing in the simple truth that family meant everything. What can I do? Janet's expression was compassionate but realistic. Legally, it's complicated. They've created a paper trail that suggests you're incompetent to manage your affairs. Fighting it means proving you're mentally sound while they argue the opposite. It means depositions, medical evaluations, court proceedings that could take years. Years I might not have. Years they were counting on me not having. And practically, you need evidence that the documents were forged. You need witnesses to your mental competency. You need to move fast before the guardianship hearing. The guardianship hearing. Scheduled for next Thursday. 6 days from now. They haven't told you about it because they're required to serve notice. But the law allows service by publication if you're deemed unable to understand the proceedings. Unable to understand. Like a child. Like someone whose opinions no longer mattered. There's something else, Janet said, her voice dropping. I think your son has been medicating you. The coffee shop noise faded to a distant hum. What? Your medical records show prescriptions for anxiety medication and sleep aids that you never requested. Medications that can cause confusion, memory issues, disorientation. The timing corresponds with when you started noticing financial irregularities. The tea Sarah brought me every evening during her visits. David's insistence that I take vitamins he'd personally selected. The afternoon drowsiness I'd attributed to aging. They've been drugging me? It's possible. The medications would explain why you felt foggy, why you might have seemed confused to outside observers. And it would support their claims that you're declining mentally. They'd been poisoning me. Slowly, carefully, with love and concern and herbal tea. My own children had been erasing me one pill at a time. The file contained one final document that broke my heart completely. A recording device had captured a conversation between David and Sarah, discussing the mother situation, with the casual tone of people solving a minor inconvenience. Janet pressed play. David's voice. The house sale closes in 6 weeks. After that, we just need to get through the guardianship hearing and we're clear. Sarah's voice. She's been asking more questions lately. I think she suspects something. David, let her suspect. Who's going to believe a confused old woman with documented cognitive issues? Besides, by Christmas she'll be settled in Evergreen Manor and this will all be behind us. Sarah, I still feel bad about it sometimes. David, don't. We're protecting her from herself. She was never going to leave us anything anyway. Might as well secure our inheritance while we can still help her transition gracefully. Our inheritance. Money I'd earned, saved, invested carefully for 40 years. Money that was supposed to ensure my independence, my dignity, my choices. Graceful transition. Into invisibility. Into irrelevance. Into a place where their occasional visits would be seen as devotion rather than obligation. I sat in that coffee shop, listening to my children discuss my destruction with the same tone they'd used to plan a vacation, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The person who'd raised them with love and sacrifice and endless forgiveness died in that moment. What emerged was someone I'd never been before but desperately needed to become. Someone willing to fight. The first thing I did was stop drinking the tea. Sarah noticed immediately. Mom, you look tired. Let me make you some chamomile. It'll help you sleep. No thank you, sweetheart. I'm fine. Fine. For the first time in months I actually was. Clear-headed. Alert. I agree. The second thing I did was call my own doctor. Not the one whose signature appeared on evaluations I'd never received, but Dr. Patricia Wells, who'd been my physician for 15 years. Pat, I need comprehensive cognitive testing. Everything you can think of. And I need it documented and notarized. She was puzzled but compliant. 3 days later, I had official medical documentation that my mental faculties were not only intact but superior for her age group. Take that, doctor, whoever you are who never met me. The third thing was harder. I had to accept that the house on Maple Street, my home for 40 years, was already gone. The sale was legal, the paperwork convincing, the forgery too sophisticated to challenge quickly. But I could make them pay for what they'd stolen. Janet Morrison had given me a choice. Fight the legal battle that could take years and might fail, or go nuclear. I chose nuclear. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. Wednesday night I called both my children. I'd like to have dinner tomorrow. All of us together. There are some things we need to discuss. David sounded surprised but pleased. Of course, Mom. Everything okay? Everything's about to be. They arrived at 5:30, David in his expensive suit, Sarah carrying flowers from the grocery store. Bringing gifts for the woman they were stealing from. Such thoughtful children. I'd prepared their favorite meal. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, fresh bread, apple pie. The same dinner I'd made for countless celebrations, holidays, ordinary Tuesdays when they'd needed comfort. The last meal I'd ever cook for them. We made small talk through the first course. David complained about insurance companies, Sarah shared gossip from her yoga studio. They both asked about my health with the kind of casual concern that felt normal unless you knew better. Unless you knew they'd scheduled a hearing to have you declared incompetent in 18 hours. Over dessert I pulled out the manila envelope. I want to show you something. The blood drained from David's face when he saw the bank records. Sarah went very still, her fork halfway to her mouth. I hired a private investigator, I said conversationally, serving myself another slice of pie. Amazing what you can discover when you actually look. The silence stretched like a breaking rubber band. Mom, David started. Did you know that forging someone's signature on legal documents is a federal crime? Even if that someone is your mother. Sarah found her voice first. We were trying to help you. You were getting confused, making bad decisions. Like objecting to you stealing my money? The word hung in the air like smoke. We didn't steal anything, David said, switching to his doctor voice. We managed your assets responsibly. We prevented you from making mistakes that would have cost you everything. Mistakes like keeping my own money? He actually had the audacity to look offended. You're 72 years old, Mom. You can't live alone forever. You can't manage complex finances forever. We were planning for your future. My future or yours? I opened the recording device and pressed play. Their voices filled my dining room, discussing my destruction with casual efficiency. Sarah started crying. David went very pale. Where did you get that? Does it matter? What matters is that tomorrow morning, instead of attending a guardianship hearing where you plan to have me declared incompetent, you're both going to be meeting with FBI agents who specialize in elder abuse. Elder abuse. The phrase I'd never thought would apply to me. I've also contacted the medical board about your fake diagnosis, David. Turns out they take a dim view of doctors who diagnose patients they've never examined. His medical license. The thing he'd worked for, sacrificed for, built his identity around. And Sarah, your sworn affidavit about my mental state? The one where you claim I've been confused and paranoid? That's perjury. Also a federal crime. Perjury. Such a clean word for such a devastating betrayal. They both started talking at once. Explanations, justifications, apologies that sounded like negotiations. But I was done listening. You have one choice, I said, cutting through their panic. You can cooperate with the investigation, return what you've stolen, and maybe avoid prison. Or you can keep lying and discover how seriously the justice system takes crimes against the elderly. David leaned forward, his expression shifting to something I'd never seen before. Calculating. You can't prove we forged anything. You can't prove we didn't have your best interests at heart. And frankly, Mom, who's going to believe you over two respected professionals? There was the truth beneath 40 years of I love you. You think I'm some confused old woman who can be manipulated and discarded when she becomes inconvenient. I think you're making a huge mistake, he said quietly. One that's going to hurt everyone. Everyone. Meaning him. You're right about one thing, I said, standing up from my own dining room table for the last time. This is going to hurt everyone. But unlike the hurt you've caused me, this hurt will be deserved. I walked to the front door and held it open. Get out of my house. While it's still my house for 3 more weeks. They left without another word. Sarah crying, David rigid with fury. The next morning, federal agents arrested them both. David at his medical office, Sarah at her yoga studio. The local news called it a sophisticated elder abuse scheme and a betrayal of family trust.